So let's go ahead and just start through the action.
I would suggest, Chris, just in terms of the stats that you're keeping on your poker tracker, I think it's good, and you do tend to give me these reads in terms of how active the person is on the flop, how wide you think they're calling the flop, how often they're raising the flop, how often they're continuation betting. I think those are stats that are worth keeping on your HUD. But my HUD, and I'm not a big HUD person, but when I do use one, I usually have one line that has the pre-flop stats that you're talking about here, the 35, 14, 1.3, and then the second line of my HUD is flop stats, how often they call flop bets, how often they raise flop bets, and how often they continuation bet when they're the pre-flop aggressor. I think that's really important in terms of thinking through later in the hand. So it's good that you have this read about how often he peels, but I think it might be more helpful if you're actually keeping that in your HUD.
Okay. Okay, cool. So we will work on adding that in. Okay, anyway, so here we've got 9-8 of diamonds, raising under the gun in a 5-handed game. Again, not a raise I'm going to make every time with 9-8 suited, but it's a good way to range balance, because I think at this table I had a fairly tight image among the other regulars. Donkey for life, too cool for school. And the other player of note in this hand, I believe, is Thune. Yes, Thune, who is a 48-13, and his name implies kind of a fishy player. So we raise to 7 under the gun. The button calls, and the big blind calls. So the flop is three-way. The flop comes down Jack of clubs, 6 of hearts, 2 of hearts, and the big blind checks. I made a continuation bet on this board of $14 into a $22 or $21 pot, depending on how much rake was taken out. And as I noted to Andrew when I submitted him this hand history, is that my flop bet was a bit small. But I had a reason for this. And my main reason was that I felt that both of my opponents' flop calling ranges and pre-flop ranges in general were pretty wide and pretty weak. So pretty much I kind of reasoned that if someone had a jack, if someone had pocket eights, if someone had maybe even 7-6, they weren't going to fold for 19 any more frequently than they would fold for 14. So my continuation bet is going to be a bit more profitable the times they both miss and I take down the pot, betting 14 than betting 19, since I don't think I force any more folds betting bigger. Andrew, do you have thoughts on that, given that it's three-way? Or
I like that analysis a lot, and I think it's also nice. Like the hand that you have, although you don't actually have a gut shot, you have draws to draws, meaning that like you could get a 7 or a 10 on the turn, and I think if you do, those are definitely cards that you want to barrel again at. And so it's actually to your benefit to get called later on the flop if you think you're and you can probably maybe like bluff aces and kings on the turn also. So if you think you're going to be firing a second barrel with some decent frequency, it's actually somewhat to your advantage to encourage people to call you on the flop just so that there's a larger pot for you to bluff on the turn.